Welcome to Brand to Scale, where I explore the real stories behind founders and leaders who build purpose-driven businesses with grit and intention. I'm Jess, your host, co-founder of Alchemy, and I'm endlessly curious about what really fuels people through the ups and downs of building something from scratch. Today's guest has been leading his business for over 17 years, long before sustainability was trending, from building remanufactured technology into a commercial opportunity to shifting an entire brand into something more impact-led. Anthony Levy has built a business with a conscience, which is what we like. Anthony, welcome to the podcast.
Well, hi, Jess. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Could you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your business?
All right. Well, where to start? So I guess, do you want an origin story of how it all came about?
I'd love an origin story. Yes, love one of those.
Okay. Well, as you can tell, I'm quite old with my grey hair. So you've got to fly back a little bit. But when I was a kid, home computers were just becoming a thing. And candidly, my home computers, not all computers, so
not all computers,
home computers were becoming a thing. And candidly, my family can afford to buy me my own home computer. But we have this weird relationship with technology that once it's a couple of years old, often we're willing to give or even throw it away. So I built my own home computer as a little spotty, geeky kid. I don't mean soldering iron and that kind of level, but slotting in the cards and connecting the whole thing and configuring it. And I realized then that you can make value out of technology even when people think that they're done with it. And that sort of seeded an excitement in technology for me. So I went off and studied computer science. Then I graduated from university around the time when the internet bubble was a thing, so we've got a bit of an AI bubble right now. So there's some similarities there, but that got me into startups. So I got some startup experience really early on in my career, realized that I might have understood the tech, but I didn't really understand business. So I went off to business school in Madrid and studied there, came back and thought, well, I need to join one of these big tech companies. So I joined the big telecommunications company, Cable and Wireless. FTSE 100 company back then. It's now been acquired by Vodafone, but perhaps realized some interesting cultural learnings there, perhaps for how I wouldn't run a company, and that perhaps it wasn't really that well suited to the big corporate world, at least not on the inside. So started to start my own thing. And I came across an opportunity from a big tech vendor who had just launched their own remanufactured program. So they were taking product back from the market, completely remanufacturing it and selling it as good as new, but a substantial discount. And this was back in the financial recession of 2009. And actually, candidly, a lot of people wanted to save money or needed to save money at that time. They didn't care that much that it was more sustainable. But we built a whole business then around helping people save money. But increasingly, we were aware of the scale of how much this was reducing waste, how much it was reducing carbon. And yeah, it was probably about 5-6 years ago when I realized, well, there's an opportunity here to flip this on its head. So yes, we're saving customers money and we're delivering technology solutions, but we're actually also doing a really good thing here. And we should be able to articulate that and talk about that and then coach others and how they can replicate that themselves. So I guess in a nutshell, that's been my business journey. But as someone outside of business, I'm a family man. I've got 2 young girls, so I'm a real champion. I like to think I'm a not so secret feminist, really trying to support, encourage my wife and my girls in my life. I've always been very focused on sport. So never quite managed to go pro as a rugby player, but I got close. I played for London Irish for a bit. These days, I'm more like to be what they call the mammal, so a middle-aged man in lycra, often flying around up very early in the morning at high speeds, trying to still feel that edge, that competitiveness, that energy you get from competing in a sport. That probably summarizes me pretty well, really. I mean, I do a lot of public speaking in this space, have won a few awards in it. But yeah, just really championing sustainable IT and doing good whilst building a business.
Wow. There's a couple of things there. There's the initial, really early interest in technology when you were young. And I guess the curiosity around that and taking things apart and building them, but also the sportness and that competitive edge that would come from that feels like a nice blend, right? Like you're interested in technology, but you've also got a little bit of drive. Was there, were you encouraged towards either or were your parents quite free with what you wanted to explore?
Yeah, I think my parents were fairly free. So my parents weren't people to put an awful lot of pressure on you. They were encouraging and supportive, but you're kind of left to find the motivation yourself. I didn't naturally I mean, I've got two older brothers, right? And one's more naturally sort of intellectual and cerebral. He was actually probably into computing way before I was. And so I probably followed him a little bit in that. And my other brother was more naturally sporty and strong and athletic. And so I had these kind of two other role models in my life also that I was all constantly kind of comparing myself to and probably a little bit compete with, or at least sort of follow their path. But yeah, so my parents were supportive, but they didn't push me down any of these routes. That passion and drive probably came a little bit later.
That's brilliant. Is there a part of you that was wishing that you'd, gone into the sport arena more than where you are now with the technology, or is it just the way the life happened?
I mean, in my head, I like to think I really tried. It's not easy to become a professional sports person, but if I really look at it now with a bit of distance, certainly in the rugby, I didn't commit fully. I wanted to kind of do everything. At university, I wanted to have a really good time. I compare myself to some of the kids I grew up with and played rugby with. I went off to university, got a degree, had a really good time, and played some rugby at a pretty decent level. There are friends of mine that didn't go to university and just played rugby, and it was around the time that the game became professional, and they were bigger, stronger, and just better rugby players. They fully committed to it, right? So there's a balance there of like, what do you think is important? I've always tried to be good at all things, but that isn't always the right strategy. So yeah, I mean, my heart was in the rugby, but by the time I'd left university, other players were a couple of stone heavier and had played a lot more rugby and had a bit of a head start. It was quite hard for me to compete by that point.
And when you went to university then and decided to focus on what you did, was there something about that avenue that really intrigued you? And did you know where you wanted to be? Did you always want to run your own business, or did you have, ambitions?
Oh, honestly, I think someone said to me once, careers make more sense when you look backwards, not when you look forwards, right? So I think I had a slight natural affinity and maybe a slight natural advantage because I had my own home computer and I had a brother that already knew it, that I had a bit of an advantage in tech, and that got some decent results that got me into a decent university and I did okay. And I left at a time when tech was really important. So actually, I think I'm probably a little bit more fortunate than intentional at that point in my career to kind of find myself in technology at probably the fastest advancement of that and the most amount of value being created in that space. But I realized quickly that what we studied at university was much more theoretical, was much more about coding. That wasn't really my skill set. So actually, I'm a bit more of a innovator or evangelist. I like to come up with a solution, but I don't always want to see it all the way through. I quite like the conceptual bit, the solve the problem, but not necessarily show all the working. When you're doing it kind of from an academic point of view, you need to be really rigorous. You need to be really detailed. And if I'm honest with myself, those aren't my best attributes. So over time, I realized that's great. That's a much better set of attributes for an entrepreneur, but it wouldn't have made me a great software developer, or someone who's much more in the kind of hands-on doing part of the approach. And I didn't know that at the time, but looking backwards, I can see, oh, okay. So you've kept coming back to things that you're more naturally good at, the energy, the passion, the determination, the pivoting, the flexibility, that kind of stuff, as opposed to getting really good at a very, very specific skill.
That's definitely a common trait, I think, in entrepreneurs and successful, is that big vision, sort of big idea, but you need really great people around you then to implement that and get into the detail. So would you say that's accurate of your personality?
I would, but then there's the bit also as an entrepreneur, particularly early on, that you often have to do things that aren't in your comfort zone, aren't necessarily in your skill set. So like to get past that first hump of nothing to something. That for me, for example, it was sales. When I started my business, I'd never done sales. I'm reasonably outgoing. The attributes that people say normally salespeople. I quite like people. I quite like talking, as you could tell. But I'd never really learned sales. I didn't really know what you had to do. So you asked me earlier, did I see a good overlap between sport and business? I think one of the biggest overlaps was actually in that sales process. That early on, it was I kind of just had to do all the training. And I don't mean training as in studying to be a salesperson. It was literally the equivalent of running lots of miles. It was picking up
Doing
the
it.
phone. Yeah, just doing it. And actually, I value what I learned in that period, even though it wasn't sort of formal training. I use it all the time, listening, even to the pause on the other end of a phone, to the resilience as you do in training. It's like, it's uncomfortable. And I don't care what they say. No one loves trying to make 150 calls in a day. No one enjoys that. They do it because there's a purpose to it. And I'm not actually massively driven by money, but I am driven by success. I am driven by not failing, right? And for me, starting this out, like the only way I could not fail was to outwork other people. I used to draw a picture in my head of another person in another office doing my job, and I had to outwork them. And I had to,
Yes.
I had to keep going. And even when I was tired and I was getting the nose and people weren't even answering the phone, it's like, no, I just need to keep going. I will just run that little bit further, that little bit harder, and success will come. And it did. Now, I'm not sure how easily that applies today because people don't even answer their phones at all now. But
It's
that's
hard. It's harder. Yeah.
That's what worked for me back then. Really determined, really resilient, and refusing to fail.
It's so interesting because like there's some research somewhere, I'll have to dig it out, around why ex-sports professionals make really good salespeople. And it's down to that resilience and getting to the no faster. So you know that you're going to fail at some point. Is just do it and then get slightly better and do it again next time. So it's quite interesting how that. But you're right. When you do start a business, you do have to wear lots of different hats, to use that cliche, and you do have to get in the mud to get things done. But before we go into the starting the business, you mentioned you were in some environments where the culture didn't quite seem right to you and what you learnt there. And this is always really interesting to me because I think we've all had experiences of leaders or bosses that haven't been fantastic, and we can either learn from that or go and do exactly the same. So what was your experience like?
So I think sometimes it comes back to your upbringing, right? So we have values instilled to us from a really early age, right? And I think the challenge often comes when you find yourself in an environment where other people are learning different values. And I can definitely remember some specific scenarios working in this big FTSE 100 company. And I have to admit, when I walked in the door, it was like, surely these guys are the professionals. This is how you run a business. I've got so much to learn here. And I'm sure from a process point of view, that might be true. But the values, yeah, I think quite quickly I found quite tricky. One of the leaders who was there at the time I was there would quite often, either directly or indirectly via his secretary, would call me up to ask for a certain bit of information. So I was running, let me give you an example. I was running the sort of international products bit. So I was expected to be the knowledge owner, the sort of general manager for this tech product across the world, right? And the CEO always wanted to get in front of shareholders and tell them how amazing the business is, right? Standard, you're pitching, you're selling, that's fair. But he was always pushing the envelope. He always wanted a bigger number, more impressive kind of answer, and didn't really care about whether that was based on fact or not. I mean, you can't imagine any leader doing that today. But so yeah, I used to get this call. So how many countries can we deliver this service in? And I'd give a number and go, that's not enough. I'd be like, okay. So yeah, I'd think about, well, we have some partnerships, and then if we need to get to more, this is what we'd do, and that would get us to here. And they'd go, oh, okay. And then I'd hear that he'd use an even higher number than the higher number that I'd given. And then I'd be like, what? Why do that? Like, that's just lying, right? Of course we have to sell ourselves. We have to be positive. But I've always tried to hold a solid line on justifiably true, right? Yes, you might need to big yourself up. You might need to, be positive and present what you do in a positive light. But there is a line, right? And that the person who knows is you. Like, look on the inside, right? When you're saying it, it's like, is that justifiably true or not? And I found myself quite often in the organization being pushed to step beyond that. And that always felt uncomfortable to me, particularly big company, to big customers where it's going to be important to shareholders. That felt like I didn't feel right.
Is that it is a familiar story, but that an awareness almost of how that's going to impact you and your job, your team, and actually what's achievable? Do you think that was even registering, or was it just, I need this to happen? And then did you have to go and make it happen? Or
No, so it wasn't that. Like I said, he lived much more in the moment. He liked one-liners, short, pithy things he could say. No, I think he wanted to be able to be impressive in the moment and then move on, right? So did he land it in that moment and then he want to move on? For me, yeah, I thought about the consequences of that. I thought about, how that would feel if the shoe was on the foot. Like, would you want to work with a supplier that's how they communicate and they're just not telling you the truth? And it's always stuck with me, like some of those base morals of, you can trust your instincts or your morals. If you've been brought up in a reasonably strong and positive environment, you should have a good moral compass, and that'll do you pretty well.
So truth and honesty is one of your core values, Anne, I imagine, from what you've described there.
Yeah. So and just because there's an element of that you can always sort of be truthful behind the scenes. It's like, how do you go a step further than that and be transparent? Like we actually, our corporate values, transparency is one of them, right? And that can be quite tricky at times, but yes. So yeah, I definitely try and live by that. It's not a perfect world. And sometimes the treatments for yourself or for others, and you have to kind of balance the trade-off on that. But no, I think, you've got to be comfortable with the business you run, the people you manage, the people you care for, and you've got to be the one that's going to sleep at night, right? And
sleep at night, yeah, exactly. Knowing you've made the right decisions,
which is not enough to entrepreneur, right? Yeah.
Were there any other values of yours that were stretched during that time or questioned?
Probably in similar veins, right? I think there's always a slightly tricky thing when you find yourself on the commercial side of a business is what is fair? So you've got, obviously, in a highly competitive environment, you like to think that sort of fairness comes in a little bit because no one's going to provide services for less than they can afford to provide it. And the rest is all fun and games, right? It's like who's willing to take the lower margin, etc. But there are always opportunities to do the right thing or to take the shortcut, right? And I think there was an element at times of shortcutting in a very highly competitive market. I mean, the organization we were working for was competing against BT, the largest incumbent, and so it's always having to be the challenger. And I think sometimes, if you're not careful, that can breed bad behaviors. So I think at the time it probably felt more uncomfortable than it does now. I can kind of see now where some of the trade-offs were. I don't necessarily condone it, but I can see, that for the most part, individuals just trying to do the right thing, but sometimes you've got to find a way to win. So
absolutely. Yeah. And distance gives you a little bit of empathy, I suppose, doesn't it? Looking back and be like, if I was in that position.
If you can't win the business, then that might be people's jobs. And that's a hard truth. Right. So how far do you push that? Right. That is pressure.
Yeah, absolutely. What was the pivotal moment or decision where you said, I'm out, I'm going to go and build something?
I mean, the business school I went to is called the Instituto de Empresa in Madrid. And it was quite not a very well-known business school back when I went. It's a bit more known now. It's got a good reputation, but it always had one of its foundational pillars was entrepreneurship. So if you remember that, I left university, I was in a startup, some highs to that, some lows to that. But I saw kind of value creation firsthand. I saw the dynamism, the energy, even if it was a bit of fly on the seat of your pants. Then went to a business school. One of its pillars is entrepreneurship. A lot of the courses talked about this, talked about value creation, talked about managing the process. Then I went to a big corporate, which just didn't quite fit. So there was already some kind of push and pull factors. But the real ticker was something coming in front of me that I went, that's a simple business idea. And it connected with some of the other dots in my mind. So, coming across this opportunity to specialize in a very simple business. I mean, let's face it, it was taking products from someone and selling them to other people, right? That is about as simple as business gets, is that kind of transactional reseller type business, right? So a simple business that I could understand. I kind of, we should be able to win customers because we're financially competitive, but there is an element of reuse here. There's an element of sustainability that connected with that young boy that recognized that there's a problem with the way we use technology. We just give it all the way. So I think those things combined at a time in life where I could also afford to take the risk. And it's much easier to be an entrepreneur when you've got very low cost base, right? We don't have so much to risk, right? So for me, I was risking. I mean, I could argue in this both ways. I was risking a potentially good career in a telco, right? I was actually on a reasonably good path. I'd been promoted. Things were going well. They were likely going to be acquired, as they did in the end, get acquired by Vodafone. Probably, if I play my cards right, fairly steady career, and
Yeah.
telecommunications, fairly steady. But I'm quite driven by excitement. I'm quite driven by doing things a bit differently. I sort of pride myself a little bit. It sounds a bit arrogant, but I pride myself a little bit on, I don't always follow the normal path. And again, you might say that's another trait of an entrepreneur, maybe. I just like the idea of building something. So the opportunity came up. I ended up, it was with someone I didn't really know. So I ended up partnering with someone I didn't really know.
That's risky.
Yeah, and I've had it drummed into me, actually. Like I can ignore risks. I've noticed that. So that's a big red flag on reflection. But at the time, if I would get excited about an idea, I'm quite good at quelling my fears and just going for it.
That's absolutely fine if it pays off, isn't it? If that risk pays off, you're all good. Yeah.
Well, I've got other examples of this in my life if you want, but but I should have listened better to the know who you're going into business with. I absolutely should have listened better to that.
Right. Okay. Are you still in business?
Or with them?
Together, not with them. Okay.
No,
is that down to being able to get along, or difference of goals for the business? Did you align on that, or was it something else? I mean,
being honest, it comes back to values. Yeah.
Yeah.
Comes back to values. Look, I learned quite a lot from this individual. Probably not what I would have hoped to have learned. So there's kind of a lot of things I wouldn't want to be, how I wouldn't want to operate. This is a person that had been successful, which is one of the things that got me attracted to them, that they were able to do some of the financial backing for the business, which, so I did have a lot of risk because I did have a lot to lose, right? I didn't have that behind me. So they brought things to the business that very quickly, how they treated people triggered me. Maybe, women, people of color, like that. But also how he treated me. But in a weird way, the outcome wasn't that bad. Like I did all the work. I mean, literally, I did all the heavy work, right? And he was the experience and all of that. But ultimately, I know I did all the work and I built it. And it came to a head as we were kind of like, and he just said, well, fine. If you don't like it, you can just buy me out. And because he didn't really spend time to really understand the financial dynamics of the business, he'd sort of just sat along, giving me a hard time when in the months it wasn't going well, and being quite happy when it was. So I understood the value of the business better than he did, and negotiated a position that worked out fine for me. But it was really stressful because, again, I'd never sold a business, I'd never had to deal with conflict between two owners, and then it was also then back to me to then run the whole thing, which at the time was scary, but was great in the long run for development and belief and all of that. But I think most of it come back down to values and facts.
There's definitely a running theme here, isn't there? 100%. Is there anything that you brought from, working in that startup environment, which is obviously going to be very different to that large corporate, and the large corporate that you brought into that time where you were like, right, this is mine now and I need to grow it?
Yeah, so as a business, we're a bit quirky, and that's probably because I'm a bit quirky. But generally, small businesses work with other small businesses or medium-sized businesses. They don't often work with large businesses. They just don't seem to kind of fit together very well. Somehow, we've kind of bridged a gap where we work well with some big suppliers, vendors, some big ones, some of the world's biggest, and we also work well with actually some really big customers. And I think that comes down to a little bit that I understood how the big corporates work. I understand the mentality. I had those 3 or so years there meant I could speak their language. And I think perhaps combined with a bit of my education, particularly business school and stuff, like we sort of present ourselves probably bigger than we are. I think most people, if you ask them how big our organization is, we would think it was significantly bigger than it is because of the way we present and what we talk about and the problems that we say we can solve. So I think it helped in that regard. I think the process stuff's an interesting one. Like, as a small business becoming a medium-sized business, you have to do this, what sometimes people call crossing the chasm, right? I don't know if you've heard that
Mm.
expression before. Like, it's you go from like everyone's doing everything, it's loads of energy, it's loads of passion, it's great ideas. Now you need process, you need repeatability, you need systems and tools, and a lot of businesses struggle at that point.
Yeah.
It's kind of one of the first major transitions of a startup is getting over that hump. But I think you can go too far too fast in that journey too. So, my business school head saying, oh, we need to be doing this. We need to be doing this. We need to have this formal strategy for this. Like, there have been times where I've got ahead of where the business is really is. I've tried to over process drive, over complete that repeatability, that process bit, and then we've had to go backtrack a little bit. So, we've eventually navigated and found the right middle path, but you can quite quickly go too kind of process driven, too corporate, if you've got that background. And perhaps if you've never been in that space, perhaps you do it more naturally when it's needed, But it's added benefits, but perhaps sometimes it's giving me the wrong bias. Like, trying to be too professional, too cool.
Yeah, I've seen that as well before. You go too heavy into policies and procedures, and you kind of lose the excitement and the energy of coming together and building something.
Your dynamism, your flexibility, your responsiveness.
Yeah,
that's why you're in business, and you go, oh, am I losing that a little? Yeah.
Is there a way to keep that balance then of that sort of startup energy and the actual business having to run efficiently?
Yeah, but honestly, I'm not sure I've consistently got the right mapping for where we're at in our journey. So we've actually retained a lot of the flexibility of a startup, and there's probably areas in our business where maybe we should have grown up faster, or reevaluated. We're certainly kind of, because I'm so ideas driven and I get excited about new things. Actually, one of the things I've had to be careful of is when I'm coming with a new idea, I contextualize in the right way that doesn't become a distraction.
Yeah.
And I still probably don't get this right all the time. If my team on it, you still do that all the time. But to visualize that. So imagine as the entrepreneur and perhaps the creative ideas person in an organization, you're visualizing you're on this journey. Like, I don't want to talk about journeys, right? But like, you're in this location here, and you're trying to head towards the spot on the horizon. Okay. Now, it's you, and there's a whole wagon train behind you. Okay. So it's fine to operate as the scout. Like, run away, go and look at a lot of things. Run over there, run over there, run over there, run over there. But what you can't do is keep bringing all that wagon train with you. Because then you're like, they're then doing this crazy long journey to get to the horizon. So you said it's okay to run away and then come back and then say, oh, we're going to make a small correction here, we're going to make a small correction there. What you can't do is expect all these other people who don't operate like you, they can't run away and then come back to the thing they're doing today, that they can easily be distracted. You've got to keep the wagon train mostly going in a straight line. And that, I've learned that, and I try and apply that. I don't always succeed in it, but it's definitely one of my reflections of, okay to have the ideas, just don't distract the whole organization whilst you're at it.
Yeah, I can empathize with that. I'm one of those people as well. And I've read something the night before, and I can run in and go, we should do this, and it's going to be amazing. And you could just see the looks on people's faces like, oh no, we've got other things to do and we're focusing. And it's took me a while to sort of really understand that people have different maps and different views of reality and different ways of doing things and processing things in their brain. And you can't always assume that your energy is going to be easily transferred to someone else if they're a completely different person. Understanding that is, as a leader, I think is really important. And I think not a lot of people do take that time to understand people and how they work, even though they grow in organizations and recruiting, which I think is a bit of a crucial one, I guess. Which kind of is a nice segue into, you've talked about your values and, how you've worked with people across your career. Have you been able to recruit, retain, and work with people and build a team that align to your values, or have you had to sort of find the best people and then bring them into that fold gently? How have you approached that?
That's a really good question. So definitely had a lot of variety in the organization. We're this group of small companies, right? So we've had things kind of grow rapidly where we've had to hire quickly. We've had things that are consistently progressed and stuff. I think some of the people I've worked with have kind of fitted for a while in the roles that they started in. Sometimes either they grow out of that role or the organization kind of grows a bit out of their skill set. And that sounds harsh, but I think, you got to recognize there's dynamism in all things, right? And that, quite often people have a period of time that it's right for them to be with you, and that then there's a time for them to move on. I think there is a certain type of person that is comfortable with me and trusts me and will follow me, even if I'm perhaps on one of these slight detours or that things aren't quite going to plan. So I think, I definitely reward loyalty. I'm definitely someone who probably is a bit perhaps over optimistic in people. I like to believe that everyone can grow and improve. I'm not often quick to judge people or to take them off if they've joined the team and they're working hard, even if it's not going to plan. I'm probably too slow sometimes to lean in hard to kind of make those tough decisions to pull people out. And I will if it's an emergency and we're right up against the wall, but I'm not the greatest of holding people accountable. I kind of expect them to hold themselves accountable, which is always the greatest attribute in a leader. Accountability is important, and giving good feedback and even tough feedback at the right time is important. So those are things I kind of have to be a little bit conscious of myself. I think the longer you're with people, if you survive difficult things together, there's such a deep bond that can be brought through that actually you can survive a lot of things. I think you build that. I think the strength in relationships in organizations comes from getting through stuff, and that can be getting through to succeeding great stuff, or that can be surviving really tough stuff. And I certainly, the group of people we have in the business today have been through, we've been through like Brexit, we've been through COVID, we've been through, one of our large surprises, cancelling our biggest contract with just 30 days notice. But I think, I'm putting words in their mouths, but I think they'd go like, always know what's happening. It doesn't hide this stuff from
transparency.
us. Transparency. It sits with the difficult stuff, doesn't run away. We call that resilience in our business. We'll try and do it together. We pull together. Unified is one of our other values. I'm pretty sincere. I think my values do shine through. I know I'm not perfect, but we're sincere about what I mean. If I say I'm going to do something, I do it. And I think there's this collectively, but we drive this kind of feeling of excitement. There's always a way. There's some way to transform where we are. There is enough something else we can do that we can find that excitement again. And those literally represent our values. I've just spelled them out to you. So trust is it does represent our core values. So transparency, resilient, unified, sincere, and transformational. And I think that's the stuff that keeps us together. That's the stuff that I think for those who are certainly still with me now after 5, 10, 15 years is because of we believe in those things and that they made sense to us in our working career.
Have you did you work through building those values with, it sounds like a lot of your team have been with you for a very long time through all those challenges. Did they work with you to identify those values and build those, or is that something you brought from the very beginning and sort of communicated?
So I think some of those values existed, but we did go through an exercise of discussing them, debating them, writing them down, shaping them, and then looking each other in the eyes and saying, are we going to live by these? Are we going to hire based on these? Are we going to promote based on these? Are we even going to let people go based on these? And are we going to guide our decisions? And, it's been, top of mind at times, and then it's drifted a little bit back. But it's just, then and they're there and they're present, and it's like all things is we try to make them intentional. It's not perfect, but we're intentional about them, and they still seem relevant. And I think that's a good test of values. If you look back, we probably did that work 8, 9, 10 years ago. If you look back and go, actually, no, they still feel relevant today. Then they're probably a good fit, right?
And you know you've done that work thoroughly then at that point, don't you? And don't have to change them
I think
every three
so.
years.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's a
Yeah,
bit like a brand. Yeah, when do can you do you does the brand fit? Does it feel
yeah,
comfortable when you wear it? Are
yeah,
you feel confident you're walking out and about in it? That's a good test for a brand. If you
yeah.
feel slightly, oh, it's a bit itchy, or you're a bit embarrassed to be seen in it, or then it's not right for you, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Those values, you see it all the time. You see businesses, they've slapped their values all over the walls, fancy office space when you go in, and then, you know, yeah, yeah. But it's funny when you see them. And I went to a business once. I walked in and it was sort of I can't remember what the exact terminology was, but it was friendly and inclusive, something like that. And the receptionist was rude. I
Nice.
do you know what I
Your
mean?
work experience failed to live
Yeah,
up to the
failed at the first hurdle.
right.
And I think a lot of businesses, they go through that exercise. They put the values on a brand document or on the walls, and then they don't live by them.
Mm.
And I think that is just asking for trouble then around your team and building that culture. Is it something that you recruit by? And is it something that you review and talk about on a regular basis with your team? And when you're setting goals or setting objectives, do you use them as benchmarks, for instance?
Yeah, I'd be lying if I said that it's forefront all of the time, every day. It's not.
Difficult. Yeah.
It, um, but in the last 12 to 18 months, we've had to make some really tough decisions. And definitely I've sort of held them up and sort of looked through them as the lens of, does it stand up here? Right. And made some very difficult decisions about certain leaders and staff, and like, no, it doesn't live up to our values. Right.
Yeah.
Like, right. So, or, as we're going through our sort of planning phase for next year, we're absolutely looking at the strategy for next year through the lens of values. And it's one of the things we'll do when we all get together in January, will be to look at the strategy, but also to look at it through the lens of those values. So yeah, I'd love to say it's present consciously, intentionally, all day, every day. But it's definitely present. It's definitely
Yeah.
present.
I love the point you made though around yes, recruiting people on values and using that to make decisions within the business, but also using them to make decisions of when people might not be fitting in as well, and when those values aren't being adhered to by certain members of the team, because I think that's really important. I think some businesses don't understand that if you do live by them, then you can have those conversations as well when you need to around
Yeah,
that.
and as I said, because I'm not heavy on accountability, right? I'm heavy on inspiration. I'm not
Mm,
heavy on accountability. I will try and inspire someone to get something done rather than beat them over the head to get it done, right?
yeah,
Um, but it's funny. I find it easier to hold people accountable to the values sometimes than even the piece of work that they're supposed to have done. Right? I know that sounds
yeah,
silly, but it it wasn't so hard. And maybe I still left it a bit too long. It wasn't so hard to make some of the tough calls I had to make through the lens of values, because like, I don't know. Again, maybe I give people a lot of out around performance. There's so many things from a performance point of view that aren't in your control.
yeah,
You can control how you behave. Right? There is, for me, that's quite black and white. And again, you see it back to your theme that you sort of picked out earlier. Like, your values, your behaviors, how you behave is absolutely in your control. Can I control whether that customer bought from you or not? You got that deal over the line, you didn't get the line. It's hard to prove, right? Did you do everything you can? Hard to prove. But how did you treat that other person? If I've got witnesses that you did treat that person that well, or you did something, so contrary to values, that's quite black and white for me. So I think,
I
that makes
agree.
it easy to, yeah.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. You can control how you behave
Mm.
at all times, believe it or not. In any
When
situation,
you're
you
under
have a
pressure,
choice.
even when you're stressed, it's still a choice.
Yeah, exactly. And as the leader, I think you've got a responsibility to lead by example.
Good.
And I think again that gets lost quite a lot with some businesses. On that note, then, is you're leading the business now. You're running it. What support do you get, and from where to be able to be that inspirational ideas guy and go in with all the energy? Because it can be quite a lonely place if you're running business and growing well.
No, that's such a key question, Jess. So, I've gone through this transition. So I think 3 or 4 years ago, I actually put in a CEO and a COO to run the main part of the business so I could start building another part of it. And one of the reasons I wanted to do that is I think I was fatigued. I think I would sort of run out of energy. I think you said that whole lonely at the top, like the weight of it had been too much for too long. And so it was the right thing to do at the time, and I don't regret it. And I kind of needed to do it. But also when I reflect on that, there was something not completely authentic about the way I was leading. And I don't mean I wasn't leading through these values. I was definitely leading through these values, but I wasn't being open about my challenges. I wasn't being open about necessarily about what I was finding tricky and why I was finding it so heavy. So it was just my burden to carry, right? I felt like, one of my friends used to say to me, well, you put the superhero cape back on, because like if something was going wrong, I feel like I'd go in and fix it. And, I had this whole, becoming a business owner and a leader quite young, you decide how you're going to be. It's not, you don't have the natural comfort of already knowing who you are. You kind of think, well, I need to be this person, right? But fast forward that a bit. So as I sort of illustrate, we've gone through this transition in the last few years. The CEO and the COO have gone. I've come back in as the leader of the whole organization, and that's giving me a chance to do it slightly differently. So I've been much more authentic about the things I find hard. I've been much more vulnerable about when I'm finding things difficult, or I've talked more openly about and discussed and agreed with what my strengths are and what my strengths are not. And that's been quite liberating. That's taken a bit of that weight off. It's allowed a conversation that I thought I didn't know if I could have, about what I wanted and what I need, and I always felt I had to suppress my wants and my needs and just be the boss, that we have a much more healthy conversation about what each of us is good at, what each of us aren't. We have an ongoing joke that I'm the optimist, my operations leads the pessimist, and our financial leads the realist. And those are all useful kind of lenses to see the world through at different times. And we can sort of, we kind of joke about it and we play with things. And when we're looking at opportunities or risks and stuff, we can sort of look at them from these different angles. But, when I talk about what I want to be doing, what I'm good at, we start to push each other. And by talking about it, we push each other. If I'd just kept it to me, I'd be trying to navigate myself there. But just in the last week, we were talking about how do I have more time to do the bit I'm really excited about. And if I hadn't sort of outed that, I'd have suppressed that need and that want and been frustrated about it. But now I've been held accountable in the call earlier today. No, we've got to hire this role because otherwise you're not going to have the freedom to do the thing you want to do. Nice. I never thought I could have that conversation. It sounds dumb. But I always thought I had to suppress my needs and my wants. One, to stay true to these kind of empirical values that I have, but two, because I just had this image that that's what the boss does. Does what's needed rather than what they want. Now I have this vision of other leaders who just squeeze all the money out of the businesses and just demand other things from other people, but that's not me. So I had to find this kind of way of doing it I've been comfortable with.
That's interesting though, isn't it? Because a lot of people would say they're building a business to have a bit more freedom and do things that they enjoy. And by suppressing the things that you want and things you want to do, you're kind of doing the opposite of what what the point of building it was. Yeah. But it's hard because, as you say, you feel like you have to be all things to all people in that team because you're responsible for them. So you do go in and firefight and you do go in and rescue things and really probably not focus on the bits that you care about the most in doing so.
Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah, that's difficult. How are you managing family life then with building this business? Because it's got to be a lot of time.
So there's a lot of answers for that because I strongly believe you need to have a good family life. You need to have something outside of work and family life, for yourself to keep you own. Yeah. So I probably do slightly overcommit in terms of the things that I want to do. But I also set out with quite a clear lens of what I thought success looked like. And I've not been perfectly aligned to that because I said to myself right from the very beginning, if I have to consistently work more than 50 hours a week, and I think I pretty much wrote this down as one of the things, like, then the model's right. Right. That's what I told myself. So I've got to work as hard as I can in that time, then stop. And when I started the business, that was I had time to play rugby and had time to spend with my new partner. But I've maintained that because we've had children, we've got married, and we've got other things in life, and be there for dinner most of the time, right? Be there for breakfast, be there at weekends, take the holidays, go and do things with family, with friends. I said now I'm more of a cyclist, so it's like get up early in the morning and go ride your bike. I think I've done a good job at holding to those kind of boundaries. So set those boundaries. I think I've held those boundaries quite well. The hard thing is what the business takes from you, no matter what those hours, like the pressures don't stop just because you've turned the laptop off. I haven't always been able to prevent that leaking into life. And when I'm stressed or worried or not sleeping because things are really tough, obviously that has impacts. Or I'm not the best dad when I haven't slept much in a week, right? And that's human and normal. But of course it leaks into it. And you do have some of those additional pressures that you wouldn't have if you weren't running your own business, if it's someone else's business, meeting cash flow, knowing you're going to have enough money to pay the salaries every week, having to manage big transformations where things have gone wrong, worrying about that stuff. But I think I don't know if you've heard the analogy about having children, but like people say, like the highs are higher and the lows are lower.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's quite true.
Yeah.
When it's really going well, you really feel like it's, you're part of it. And it's that kind of thing you've helped shape. But also when it's going wrong, you feel like it's more your fault and more your responsibility to fix it. So I think, I think in some ways I've been good at setting the boundaries. In other ways, inevitably it kind of seeps into my life. And I probably, can you care too much? I never know about that statement, but I do. I can get over emotionally embroiled in it. I've been doing it probably for too long. It does feel like a big part of my life, like 17, nearly 18 years. It's like, well, some people have said, well, it's got really, really hard. Why don't you just walk away? You're right, kind.
Oh, it's not easy.
And my work, particularly, when it was really, really, really hard at one point, was like, this is messing you up. This isn't good for you. You need to stop. We'll find a way. She's quite successful in her own career. She's like, we can manage, just stop. And so it's like, on one hand, that's nice, but on the other hand, it kind of lacks a little bit of the understanding of what I've already invested.
Yeah.
Those thousands of hours hammering the phones, all the cool stuff that we have survived, to what then just walk away.
Yeah. Yeah, that's not an easy decision to make, is it? There's so much emotional weight in that to let that go. It would almost feel, I don't want to speak for you. I won't go into it. This is your story, but we closed a business after a very long time, for various different reasons. And it was like grief, because it was another child, it was another child essentially that we built from the ground up and then suddenly had to say goodbye to. And it almost feels like a waste of that time, even though it was good while it was happening. Almost felt like, oh my God, what have I done for the last 12 years? What was the point of that? So yeah. Do you think you'll ever be able to retire? Retire, let go? Are you going to put another CEO in place at some point and have some time off, or could you let go emotionally?
So is another one of those really good questions. I'll joke, this was going to be, when I started it, a sort of 3 to 5 year journey. That was what my head was, right? So I'm already way over that. And interestingly, like in my peer group, it's just the first kind of discussions, and people aren't there yet, but just starting to talk about. So when you're thinking you might, and
Interested.
Friends have been. I've got friends, and this is probably the last generation that's ever going to happen to. I have friends who've literally been at one company since we left university. So we're talking 30 odd years.
Wow.
And quite a lot of tech companies, because we study tech, so they've done pretty well, right? So but they're at this kind of part of their journey, like, I don't really have to work. I'm kind of financially set, and I'm like, well, I didn't take that career. I took the much more roller coaster kind of high risk,
Yeah.
maybe higher reward. We're yet to see, right?
Mm.
But yes, it is sort of kind of on the edge of awareness. And last year when it was getting really hard, and I've got I've got my wife saying, "Oh, this is messing you up." Out of love, are you sure you want to keep throwing yourself at this? On the other side is that same bit that I had at the very beginning, is a refusal to fail. So for me, somehow, what I'm looking for is to be able to write a good narrative here that feels like some kind of success, right? And part of my problem, I probably never really sat down, and I've been coached and mentored on this a few times. Like, well, what is success? Some people will say it's just about the number, right? So what's the number? Yeah, someone turned up and
Mm.
gave you a bread envelope with how much would it have to be in that envelope for you to walk away? And the promise for me, it's a lot more complicated than that, and not just the
Yes.
investment time and emotion, because and it's partially one of the things that gets me up in the morning is the same thing that makes that difficult. Is actually I care more now. We're doing things that I genuinely believe are making a small part of the world a little bit better. Like, we are
Yeah.
fundamentally actually making the world just a little bit more sustainable. And I can really believe in that. I'm more emotionally invested in that now than I was before. So that's the there's probably a longer answer here, but there's a kind of probably I'm probably not going to stop working. I feel like we're a bit like this, Jess. We're the creative minds, high energy, like building, creating things. That the shift that I probably need to make is shedding some of the weight of the whole organization and doing just a bit more of the bit that I'm most passionate about, right?
Yeah.
And start that a journey, a transition towards, it being a bit more my own terms. I mean, I
Mm.
coached my wife out of a big consulting firm to do her own thing, and it's easy to coach other people. It's much harder to coach yourself.
It is.
And
Yes, true.
getting into the point where commercially she's in a great place. She has great day rates. She picks and chooses largely the work she does. She has time to do other things she cares about. She's fully invested. She works a busy week, but she has probably a few more breaks than I do. She has a bit more chance to pick and choose what she does. And she has other things going on, right? And I've got to make that transition at some point. And I'm
Yeah.
increasingly, that feels like that's getting closer. I don't know if that's,
Yeah.
a year away or a few years away, but that's getting closer, of like wanting just not to feel as responsible for all the other things.
Yeah.
The genius of her model is she has no boss and she has no employees. It's just her. So
Beautiful.
she's
Beautiful.
right. And
Mm.
I've coached this point. I'm so impressed with myself. I've coached this
Yeah.
point. So
I
disappointed.
did that. I did that.
I've navigated to myself. So I watched my wife having her best life. Literally,
Mm.
she's fit, she's healthy, she's motivated, she's energized. And I'm a bit like, oh, this is pretty hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not gonna lie, you sound a little bit jealous, Anthony.
I'm a little bit more than a little bit jealous. Yeah, no, I
Yeah.
am. But it's also a little bit inspiring. Like, this is possible, right?
Yeah.
And look, I shouldn't really take any credit. Like, she's amazing. And one of the things I really like is championing her, and it's great. Like, she's done so many cool things. She's written a book. She's built this business. She's the chair of something called the Women's Sport Trust. She runs a whole beach volleyball club. She's amazing, right? Also, present here at home, and a partner for me. We really strive to be those kind of partners, and I love all of that. But yeah, there's a bit of jealousy. but
Yeah, it happens.
it's
How important, I'm going slightly off track, but it's interesting because how important is it, do you think, for leaders, for entrepreneurs, people running their own businesses where they can feel quite isolated, to choose their partner wisely, or at least to make sure that you are on the same page with what life is actually going to look like in reality, with one of you building a business?
I think that might have been the best questions I've ever asked, Jess. I don't know, because we're not, we're not islands. Like, we fundamentally, like, you don't have to be in a relationship to have a fulfilled life, but it's a very important part of it, having a relationship. So again, I think what is helpful is having some, as you said, some of these things really early in our relationship. My wife and I were like, what's important, right? And both of us wanted to be doing things that made the world a little bit better, right? She works in diversity and inclusion. I work in sustainability, right? Bit of a nightmare if we go to America, but let's not go there. That was really early on in our relationship. This kind of stuff we talked about in those lovely early moments when you're kind of getting to know people about what's important to you. So that was in there. Equally, when I was taking my step to take a risk, she was in a stable, well-paying job. So that really helped. So I was like, it was my time to take that risk. And then once I've established myself, that was when I was tapping out on the shoulder and going, well, if you want to, now's the right time for you to try and go on that journey too. And she has. So I think you've got to, establishing that early on is helpful. I think it's quite hard to know what it's really going to be like unless you've been through it before. So I think if you should interview her next and get her side of the equation.
I like that idea. Yeah.
Well, maybe you should. I mean, she's amazing. You should do a crazy good podcast with you, I'm sure. But I'm trying to think, what would she say if you asked her? I think she finds it a little difficult to watch me go through the mill. And it was hard the first time and probably harder the second time. And the third time, she's like, why are you doing this? Especially when probably you don't really have to. Right? I'm not saying that I wouldn't need to work again or anything like that, but you don't really have to, and we've been really conservative the way we live our life. We don't do extravagant things. I'm not the guy that buys a super flashy car every year because I want to look like I'm successful. That we just don't live that life. And I think she sees what it costs me, and a couple of times, how close it took me to. I don't mean the edge of in terms of being really silly, but I just really, really, really crushing me. And I don't think she'd want me to keep doing that.
It is hard to know, as you said, what life will be like with one of you building a business or both of you building a business, and what that actually looks like.
In time, we did avoid that.
Yeah, well, we did see we did that at the same time as we had young kids at the time, and it was definitely tough. But I agree, it's important to have those conversations early on. What are your goals in life? What's your purpose? What do you care about? And getting on the same page there, definitely.
Foundations, right? So the challenge in having relationships is you've got different foundational views of what a life well lived is going to be like. If they're fundamentally different, you've got a problem. Yeah,
and it's fun. It's the same with colleagues and work and building a team. You have to have those early conversations about what's expected from you, what's expected from them, what's tolerated, what's not, what the values are. And I think it's the same deal, I think, in personal life and business.
We're going to spend more time with them anyway, aren't you?
Yeah, this is it. You do. So you've got to like who you work with. Absolutely. You mentioned that you're into sustainability, your wife's in diversity inclusion, so you've clearly got strong purposes in life. And you've mentioned about not living the flashy life, and that the impact you leave is more of what you're aiming for than the scale or the size or the number. Is that talk to me a bit more about that. What does that mean?
Well, first of all, I recognize that is a luxury, right? Not everyone has that opportunity. A lot of people are having to work tremendously hard just to put food on the table. So I appreciate that is a luxury, and it probably sounds a little arrogant's the right word, but it sounds a little bit like, oh, look at me, I'll try nice. I care about the planet more than I care about my bank balance. But it's not that. It's I think part of it is wanting to mean something. Like you're reflecting on the 12 years, like you want the energy you put into stuff to mean something. Like for me, I'm really I came from a fairly humble background, right? I've already got more than I probably would have expected in life, right? And if I'm going to continue to put this much energy and this much commitment, this much time into something, it's got to mean something to me. And the more I've dialed that up, the better I felt about work in general. It took me a while to feel confident enough to do it. As I said, I had business partners that perhaps just cared about the money. I've certainly certainly had people who've worked with me who just don't quite get it. And it's not aligned to them. To your point, not really aligned to them. It's like, well, no, we've got to maximize the amount of profit we're making. I'm like, well, yeah, but there are other things we could do alongside that, right? And
you can choose what you measure. You can choose what you measure. It doesn't always have to be the bottom line. Yeah.
Right. And that hasn't always served me terribly well, if I'm honest. But it feels more aligned to how I feel. But it's not that I'm immune to the money. It's not that I don't think money is important. It's not that I don't want us to be more financially successful. It just doesn't really motivate me very much. So whilst I know it's good, obviously we need cash flow, we want to hire people, we want growth opportunities for people in the team, we want to be able to have bigger scales, we have a bigger impact. All of those things need money. It just doesn't really, stir me. It doesn't get me out of bed in the morning. It's like, that's not really where my passion is. But I say all that, but the counterpoint to that is the success, in terms of walking away success, I think there is a part of it that would need to be financial. I think that is part of the success I would expect to have. I'd want it to live on and continue to deliver impact, but I think I am expecting some kind of financial return for 17, 18 years.
Absolutely. Yeah, that there's nothing wrong with that.
I think myself, but I've not done the big, there's only been a couple of times when there's been opportunities to take a little bit out, and the rest of the time I've just reinvested it, and that's not always, perhaps been the smartest thing. There's been plenty of opportunities perhaps where I could have taken more off the table, but actually what it's done is we've had a buffer when the tough times have come, and that's in hindsight really helps.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a wise move, definitely.
Well,
I don't think we've given you enough time to actually explain what the business actually does. Because we've talked about sustainability and impact, and we've talked about the reselling element, but what does it do?
Why don't I start with the problem we're trying to solve?
Okay.
So we live in a world that's massively driven by IT and technology, right? It's basically our current form of evolution. If we think about it, it's so fundamental. It's everything that's really changing the world comes from some kind of technology, right? And if purely in carbon terms, right? Everyone, if we talk about sustainability, people often lead straight to carbon, right? Carbon's one of the reasons why our climate is changing and why that's going to become a big problem. In IT terms, so IT already represents around 4% of global carbon emissions. So double aviation, we should be flying less, right? So it's double aviation already. So that's quite significant. But it's also the fastest growing emission stream. So it's growing faster than anything else. So IT will probably be around 14% of global emissions by 2040. So at a time when we're actually supposed to be reducing our emissions, IT is growing rapidly. We have a problem.
Yeah.
It's obviously starting to cause other challenges. So we've got critical resources. We've got a limited amount of resources on this planet, right? And obviously one of the other things we need to do to decarbonize is to electrify our grids, right? We need to move on to solar, wind, hydro, renewable energy, right?
Yeah.
So the same materials we need to build all those things, solar panels, turbines, etc., is the same list of materials we need for our IT and technology. So we have a limited amount of these metals and minerals. We're already reaching the limits of our ability to extract, to process, and get access to these materials. But we've got both of these massive industries going really, really fast. So which one are we not going to do? Because that's the decision we're going to have to make if we don't change how we consume and produce technology. So we've got these really sort of big macro challenges. There's loads of others. There's very poor human elements to this. There's a lot of slavery in the production of technology. Certainly materials is a big problem. There's a big digital divide. The whole rich is getting richer. A lot of it comes through from technology, or the people who provide and sell those technology platforms. So there's a whole load of issues around the thing that we're basing our futures on. So I'm not negative on technology. I built a whole career on technology. I think that is how we're going to continue to evolve. My whole premise is we can't let tech be the savior. They can't be the thing that saves us, that takes us forward, if it leaves carnage in its wake. We have to address, or at least try and minimize, those impacts. So my business's mission is to help organizations reduce those impacts, but also generate value. So we're not expecting people to do this just from a kind of emotive, moral, it's the right thing to do. We demonstrate and prove that they can have their cake and eat it, that they can actually lower their carbon footprint, they can be more efficient with use of materials, they can reduce the amount of waste and improve profitability. So we do that in two ways. So we do that kind of sort of thinking side of that. So we do strategic work. So we'll go in and consult and advise tech companies or big users of tech how to do this. We do training to help them kind of think it through from the strategy, actually how they can execute it. We do measurements, so we'll help people measure their IT footprints. People totally underestimate how big IT is as part of their organizational footprint. So if you're in a people business, which is largely people on laptops accessing servers using, UK is largely service driven, right? And what we said, like 70% service driven, I can remember the statistics, something like that. Then your footprint from IT is it's likely to be between 20 and 40% of your overall carbon footprint is going to be in IT. So it's going to be in the top 5 things you need to do to decarbonize. So we help with that thinking, that measuring, understanding of how, all these footprints. They're not just carbon, right? I talk a lot about carbon because it's the bit people really connect with. There's a whole load of other stuff to think about there. And we're aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN. So we cover 17 different areas of sustainability. But we start with carbon because people get that. So we do the thinking side of it, but we also help in the doing side of it. So it's actually where we came from. So the business we started, selling remanufactured equipment, well, that's delivering these solutions. So actually delivering an IT, a technological solution in a more sustainable way. And it's typically also a more cost-effective way. So typically we save people money at the same time we're providing them something that's more sustainable. So it's that thinking and doing that really encapsulates what we do across the group. We work upstream with suppliers to help them do better. We work downstream with customers to help them do better too. And we try and forge a whole circular economy in the middle, hence the name circularity first, to get people to think about this as a first principle, not as an afterthought.
That's fascinating. And surely an easy sell, right? What organization doesn't want to save money and improve their carbon footprint? Or is it?
I think it's conceptually easy when you have someone in the room.
Yeah.
But what is the other message? Just how noisy is your world, right? How many messages do you get handed a day on email, on phone, on Messenger, and your LinkedIn? Like, IT is probably also the noisiest space.
Yeah.
There's a crazy noisy space, and our messages are often counter, not directly, but often counter or slightly different to those other messages. So we've got a much smaller voice because we candidly don't have the money to shout and scream. Although if you follow me on LinkedIn, we look quite noisy because we try and consistently deliver messages inside here. So we're quite a small voice in a really noisy area, and we're slightly contrary. So we're not trying to sell AI. 90% of IT is trying to sell you some kind of AI, an AI-enabled an AI-enabled network, an AI service itself, an agent, AI agents. Like we're not. That's not our message. So we suffer a bit of being different. We suffer a bit from having the ability to have a smaller voice. And let's face it, like what we're offering is a bit esoteric. It's just like, and we need to get better at this, but selling a CEO a strategic workshop with their leadership teams to talk about sustainability.
Yeah.
So we do that, and they're very well received when we do. But most CEOs aren't immediately waking up in the morning thinking, "Oh, do you know what I need? I need to my whole leadership team spend 2 hours of their super important productive time thinking about sustainability." No one thinks that before I have a conversation with them. When I start to illustrate the benefits of that and how it can affect their bottom line, their win rate with new customers, attracting and retaining talent, what it will do for their overall brand, I can normally get them there. If you sat me down at a dinner table with a CEO, by the end of the day, he'd be at least thinking about it. I guarantee it. I don't mean arrogant, but people
That's
get to
the way
those
to do
roles.
business. Yeah.
Well, probably, yeah. But listen, these days it's very hard to go and break bread.
It is.
Like again, I could used to pick up if I picked up the phone 50 times, 10 people would have talked to me. They might have said no, go away, but they'd have answered the phone. You wouldn't get there these days. But I think most people get to where they are in their roles because they were very good in their function. So they became a great accountant and they rose up and became a CFO, or they were really great at sales and they became a commercial leader, right? That's how they got good. Functional area expertise, probably an industry or a sector. They really nailed, I'm good at IT sales. I've become a commercial leader in a big IT company. Great. But what part of their journey are they likely to have learned that sustainability might be interesting, possible, necessary? Only the little signals they might be starting to pick up from customers.
Yeah.
Right. And so what drives that? Well, regulation might drive that. That's certainly a lever. The messaging in society that climate change is a thing. Of course, we have a lot of people who think it's not. 99% of scientists do believe that, but we don't really time as much as we need to. So it's not. It's most people will agree. If you asked 100 people in society, do you care about climate change? Most of them say, yeah. If you ask them, is it in the top 3 things you're worrying about today?
No.
So yes, it's a bit of a no-brainer once you get started.
Yeah.
Getting it to high up on someone's priority list, they want to look at it today. They want to spend 2 hours of their whole leadership team's time. This random guy with grey hair is really passionate about sustainability, talk about sustainable IT. So yeah, it sounds like a no-brainer. And honestly, you're right. And that's what I love about it. It's just getting people to stop and think about it. And that's the nut that's caught in a very, very noisy space. If there wasn't a lot of noise going on and I could force people to sit and listen to me for, I don't know, 20 minutes, half an hour, decent chance. But,
yeah, absolutely. I imagine though that, I think I need to chat to you afterwards about a different business because I think this is interesting, but isn't it going to be, I'm just thinking of businesses who are going out to tender or big contracts and things like that with, that sustainability accreditation or whatever you want to call it, we're doing something about it, is on, customers' radars now. They want to know that they're working with businesses who are taking this seriously. And there's things like B Corp and ESG labels and things like that people are striving to get. Are they helpful or just a label and they're not really doing very much?
So no, I think some of it's helpful. Yeah, I mean, so we work really closely with the EcoVadis, which is a bit more of a big corporate one, and we're EcoVadis Platinum. That puts us in the top 15% of sustainable companies worldwide, right?
Nice.
And some of our customers really, that is absolutely the thing they want. They love that. They feel like we're a leader in that space. It's a good stamp of approval. We all like stamps of approval. The problem is it doesn't necessarily drive customer behavior. It reflects customer behavior. So if a customer cares, those things are important to them. If they haven't yet decided they care, it doesn't make any difference to them. So something like B Corp it's a signal that a company is doing some of the right things to a certain degree, right? And there's some criticism of things like B Corp, only because it doesn't really challenge you necessarily to change your model that much. So yes, you need to donate 1% of your income to some good cause. I would say quite a lot of entrepreneurs find charities or they donate time. They'll do things to give a little bit back. One, they might feel like it's the right thing to do, or B, they'll feel like at least their team think it's the right thing they should do.
Yeah,
right.
There is that.
So B Corp had a lot of progress in the early days, and it's not a bad way to signal that businesses can be better. If you think about it, 1% is fairly small. One of the things we try and champion businesses to do is look at their whole business model. So not just are we going to make ourselves a little bit more sustainable? We're going to switch to renewable energy. We're going to recycle paper, which is trivial. And we're going to do a few things internally that make sense to make us a bit more sustainable. I mean, that's not bad. It's not the same as changing what you offer to be something that is A, more sustainable, or B, helps your customer be more sustainable. Those ripples are much greater for a significant business than it is just about worrying about their own emissions or their own impacts. And that's a shift we're starting to see, that people go, oh, that's more transformational, right? That's more significant. And you can't really put a label on that. That doesn't make you a B Corp. But if you're someone who provides a meaningful, large service to people, and you make it more sustainable, you help them be more sustainable. That is much, much more impactful than just tweaking your own internal operations.
Absolutely. Yeah, that makes total sense. But yeah, it does feel like a no-brainer, but I understand, are they waking up and thinking, oh, I need to do this today, and getting that message across might be a challenge. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. You're clearly doing something valuable, and you're clearly really passionate about it. That's coming across. What is next for the business now over the next few years while you contemplate slowing down slightly, if you can?
Seen that, but where are they? So one of the things, as I said, one of our challenges is really scaling up the number of customers we serve. So we actually have very satisfied customers. I know it's not arrogant, like we work really hard to do the right thing, to deliver value. As I said, it's really hard to break into new customers. So really, particularly in the doing part of our business where there are loads of other people offering IT solutions.
Yeah.
Like literally, you walk down the street, you'll bump into a couple of people that work in some kind of IT reseller or something like that. Like, there's loads and loads of those people doing that. So that's quite hard. So we've got to find a way to crack that nut. One of the things we want to get better at is partnerships. So as I said, we have some really great customers. Like we're finding ways to help do what we do with their customers, help them serve their customers with some of the things that we can offer, right? We have customers that have 15, 20,000 customers. There's something we could do together with them that added value to their customers, again, would increase this ripple effect that I talk about, right?
Yeah.
Rather than it just be us selling something to them, right? So partnerships is something that we talk a lot about. It's not easy. Like it sounds logical. Investing in partnership takes time. Both sides have to be decently invested in it. We could go back to the same thing we were talking about earlier about who you work with. You've got to be aligned. There's all
Choose
that kind
wisely.
of stuff. Choose wisely. And you can burn a lot of time I call it kissing frogs and not find your prince, right? So it's a difficult one. But that's something we're thinking about. One of the other things we're thinking about is acquisition. Now, we've only ever done one acquisition in our journey so far. And it didn't immediately yield an awful lot of financial benefit, but actually the auxiliary benefits, so the systems and the tools we got from it, some of the talent we got from it, some of our learnings and experience in other parts of business were really valuable. But we've largely been organic. We've talked about how hard it is for us to grow as a business. We've nearly entirely done that through organic means. And we've been pretty clever and pretty careful with our money over the last kind of year or so. We've got a little bit that we could go and see if there was a business that could help us kind of take that next step. So we're exploring maybe an acquisition. And of course, the other thing is continuing to think about what is the right mix of talent in our organization. The part of it I talked about, the newest part, this more consulting advisory piece, is still fairly small. So we're still serving a relatively small number of companies. But I can see there's demand enough and the value's there, that's an area that we're thinking about hiring. In fact, there's a couple of people we're talking to right now of would it be a good fit to ramp up that part of the business.
That's really exciting. And I think that consulting part is huge, isn't it? Because that'll be essentially a lead generation machine. You get in the room and have those conversations, and then it is a no-brainer if you can explain the benefits that way. So I think that would be, none of my business, but I think that would be a good idea. Definitely.
Can I just blow my nose? You can cut this bit.
Go for it. Go for it.
I'm conscious that being a bit nasal isn't ideal anyway, but you certainly don't need to see snot running down my face.
You're fine. You're fine. No worries.
But that one about getting in the room. You've absolutely seen that. So even though it's actually a longer, harder sell, of course, you've got
conversion.
Once you've got them bought in, then everything else becomes much, much easier. And it's massively rewarding to go in and take a team. Like I talk about this kind of leadership team, having 2 hours with them, right? I say that so viscerally because it's happened to me so many times. I know going in, they're like, why is this on the agenda? Like, why is this relevant to what we're trying to achieve as a team? That's what they think going in. I don't even play it back to them. Well, my first things I'll say, you're probably sitting here thinking, why am I going to spend 2 hours talking about sustainability? And then by the end of the session, they're like, right. And then inevitably, nearly all of them will have something they want to go away and think about, to test and to take. Because as I said, none of them are experts in this space. And the people they have, they've only given them, in their business, they'll have an ESG manager, or they have someone that's worrying about part of the puzzle, but they never give them the remit to think about how to change the business. They go, measure it, report it, tweak our operations, but they never think strategically about how do we change what we do, our offering, the thing we actually offer society. How do we change that to make that more sustainable? And that's typically where the value comes back. That's typically where the really interesting stuff is.
Wow. It doesn't sound like you've got time to slow down with everything that you've just said, all the things you want to achieve, all the goals.
The part of the problem is that, if you took, again, you could also interview my operations leader, my finance lead, because they'll tell you like, he's got all these ideas. You can quite quickly flip from one to the other, but it's like, where do you place those bets? Where do you really double down and put them in? Because you're right. You only have so much time and energy to put these things. So in an ideal world, someone just fills my day with these kind of sessions where I have to go in and take people on that journey. But we're not quite there, and that's slightly trickier to deliver. But
sounds like you'd enjoy it though. Sounds like where you're that you talk about it quite excitedly when you talk about getting in that room.
It gives energy, and I like the challenge of it, but equally I love that moment of epiphany. And I've got some CEOs that I work with over a long enough period of time to watch them go from skeptic to, okay, this could be good for my business. But, I really only care about the bottom line, right? That's my job. I only care about the bottom line. To realizing they're seeing an uptick in their bottom line, and they've allowed themselves the permission to do something that means something. So that same journey I was talking about going from, you need to make money, you need to be profitable, to actually seeing like, I'm doing something that actually adds value, and that they can talk to other people about. I mean, most business owners probably don't, after a few years, don't talk to their friends about what they're doing. No, because they think that, they don't really care. They don't really get the ups and downs of being an entrepreneur. They just want to go down the pub and have a pint. That's fine. But like when they're doing something that's actually solving a societal problem, there's actually addressing it. Like we've seen salespeople go through this journey. They go through it quite quickly. Of like, we tell people salespeople only care about money, so they only talk about money. They only represent and they cover about money. And then you give them something else that they're proud of. So you go from somebody selling IT equipment, not that sexy, let's face it. Might earn good money, great. But then when they can talk to their friends or their kids about the fact that what they're doing is actually better than what other people are doing, they're actually doing something that's lowering carbon emissions. It's going to actually help a little bit with climate change, and actually is going to prevent weight and then that, and the pride. I'm not just bringing home the money to pay off the mortgage. I'm doing something worthwhile. And the CEO there, that is definitely transformational, because they're just like, I never thought I could deliver beyond this tight remit of generate EBITDA and get growth. And that moment when they play back to me how it's changed how they feel about what they do, and how it's changed perhaps in their relationship. I had people tell me about they changed their relationship with their kids, because the younger generations are perhaps a little bit more aware, a little bit more focused. They're like, I now have something I talk to my daughter about. That's like my daughter and I talk about climate change. We talk about what we can do about it, and she's so proud of me. You're like, oh, then you're really.
That's huge, isn't it? That's huge. Yeah, I can totally see how that would be a really satisfying way to make a living. Definitely.
It is, but it's very hard to get there. It's so hard to get there.
Yes, yeah. But you're doing something worthwhile. So I suppose, like you said earlier, getting up in the morning is a little bit easier, knowing that you're making an impact.
Yeah, that helps. Definitely helps.
I think I'll round off, and I'll keep the alchemy theme, because we've talked for quite a long time. I think I could talk to you forever. Imagine you've got a personal alchemy formula for success, and this could be anything from, personality traits or tools or people within the business. What's the one ingredient that you couldn't do without, and why?
That's a good question. So if you'd asked me in the past, I'd have said it's absolutely grit and determination. That's the most important thing. And the people talk about that a lot in and for entrepreneurs. You've got to get up at 3 a.m. You've got to do that. I actually don't think that's the most important thing now. I think it's important, and you'll definitely need it. I think it's just not very sustaining. Like if you rely purely on grit, you will absolutely destroy yourself.
Yeah.
Okay. Particularly if another analogy I use, if you pick the wrong table, right? So if you use the poker analogy, like, do you need to be the world's greatest poker player, or do you need to be really good at picking the table you're going to play poker at?
Oh, I like that.
I think I've been really, really good at the table I'm at. But my reflection is I've probably picked a table that's going to be quite hard to generate real value from, right? From a financial point of view, right? Yeah. And I've accepted that. But like, if the goal had been to have a unicorn, I'm not going to have a unicorn in sustainable IT, right? It's not going to, right? But what trait is more important than grit? I think the trait needs to match what you want the outcome to be. Like, if you want to enjoy your work life, if you want to it be rewarding for you, at least in the way I want it to be rewarding, you've got to find a way to shape it aligned to more of the stuff that you care about. And that sounds so trivial, so 30-second Insta, like, just follow your dreams, do. But it's not quite that, right?
No, it's not quite that.
And I think it's sometimes hard to start with that. I'm a sort of real believer in sort of social entrepreneurship. Like, charities are great and serve a massive need in society. I often feel like it serve the most needy, most challenged people. Like, they're just really hard to make those businesses themselves sustainable, as in self-sustaining, right? So I would believe you've got to find some kind of commercial model for something, solve some problem that people are willing to pay money for, and then find a way to do the stuff you care about alongside that.
Nice.
That's not an alchemy thing. That's more of a research thing. But I mean, okay, alchemy, like, I think it's about something to do with instinct and values. Okay. So if you compromise your values, you'll never be happy, right? So know what your values are. This goes back to what we've talked about, right? Go back to those values. Like, do not trade those off. No matter how important it might seem, like how big the opportunity is, like, you will not be happy if you trade off those values. You just won't be. And like, sometimes you don't even know what your values are, right? Like, sometimes and there's lots of values, right? But like really, really listen to how you feel about things. The strongest signals you can get of your values is, how do you feel in a situation? Right? And most people, and like, I like to think I'm quite in touch with my values, particularly for a guy, right? But there are a lot of times I have suppressed my values or my feelings because I felt like there's some other goal, some other need there. And I've generally always looked back on those moments and gone, should have trusted should have listened to that.
Absolutely. Yeah, your body will tell you what the decision is quite often. And sometimes we don't leave enough space to feel it or listen to it. And you're absolutely right. I agree. If you compromise on those values, you will be unhappy in whatever that decision is ultimately. I think we listen too much to the should part in our brain. Sometimes maybe we should do this. Maybe we should, buy into that business. Maybe we should take that job or whatever it is, rather than how we feel about it. Like you said, that gut instinct. Yeah, that's a great answer. I totally agree.
When I coach and mentor others, I basically give the same advice over and over with different analogies, different metaphors, and in different ways. And it's, generally speaking, listen to your instincts.
Yeah.
And then be bolder than you were thinking about being with them.
Ooh, I like that.
Like, literally, like, absolutely hear it, and then don't do it a little bit, do it a lot. Right? Yes. Be bold. Because generally speaking, the world rewards the bold move. And so people think that gut, heart, like, they think these are abstract concepts that magically appear. They come from the bigger part of your brain, right? They come from, I can't remember how much it is, but your conscious brain is only like 20% of your brain, right? That's the bit that you and I are using right now to converse. But behind there is the engine. And that takes all of the inputs you've had in your life. Everything you've seen, heard, learned about is in there. And that's where your instincts come from. It's just all of that process, bringing it to the front of your brain. And if you listen to it, you're actually listening to the bigger part of your brain, the smarter, more powerful part of your brain. But you're right. Often we suppress that. Go, no, it's up here. I can't trust that. I don't know. I can't explain where that's come from. But it's taken all the abstract stuff that you could never really think through, but because it's learned for you. So you trust that, double down on it.
Trust that, double down on it. I think that's going to be one of the pull-out quotes. Definitely. I love that. I think we should end there. That was an epic point. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Anthony. You've spent so much time with me and I really appreciate it.
No problem.
Fascinating stuff. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Brand Scale. Look out for another episode dropping very, very soon.